we're going to talk about Cuba. All right, so with the new things going on in Cuba, of course, the mainstream media is praising it as, oh, this is a great thing for Cuba, this is a great thing for Cuba. I don't think this is going to be as good for Cuba as people think it is. For those who don't know, Canada's role in Cuba kind of goes like this. Back to Pierre Elliott Trudeau, he kind of went around the Americans' idea of, instead of isolating Cuba with sanctions, what we'll do is we'll do limited trade with them, and if they improve their human rights and move towards democracy, we'll do more. So, of course, I think something like 800,000 Canadians go to Cuba every year for vacation, that type of thing. And we've been doing it for, I guess, 40 years now, 30, 40 years, whatever it is. I guess about 40 years now. So when that's happening, has Cuba, we've had, the Americans have had sanctions on Cuba forever. So basically, the Cuban economy is basically based on tourism, pretty much. It's the only economy they really have. Now, I've worked with Cuban people before, and, when you ask them about Cuba, it's not a place you'd want to live. And anybody that vacations there will usually probably tell you, when you go to Cuba, bring your own toothpaste, bring your own things, because they don't have that there. It's pretty Spartan, The Cubans aren't really allowed to have anything. And when I worked with a guy named Marino, he'd moved to Canada, and this is kind of what kind of changed I had a bit, because I was a younger man, I was in my early 20s, I had a bit more of a leftist view on immigration at the time, saying, well, if you just give everybody a chance, everybody will do good, and, the more people you can bring in, probably the better, because we have such a great country here. And, you don't think abstract, you don't think, there's a lot of things you don't, when you're young, you're stupid, okay? When you're young, you're stupid. Just leave it at that. And I used to think, okay, well, the refugee thing was good, a good idea, and all that. And it's not that it's a horrible idea, but it's not a prosperous idea. So if you're wondering what I'm doing right now, just to divert, I got 38 specials that I have to reshape the case and pop the primers out. So I'm going to be doing that as I'm doing this. So anyway, I started talking about talking with Marino, and I was like, oh yeah, so you're from Cuba, you barely spoke a word of English well enough that you could understand him and stuff like that, but he struggled with a few words and stuff like that. And him and his wife had moved here to Canada, and they were trying to make a go of it, and he had moved here a couple of years earlier, okay? And here's what ended up happening. Every time he went to go to get a hearing for his immigration status, a refugee would come in, make a claim, and he'd get backed up to the back of the line. So, and he says it takes like 2 years to get seen. The back, because we bring in so many people, and everybody figured out that if we just claim asylum, you go around the people that are coming through. Technically these people are still following the Immigration Act, so they're, at least they're doing it legally. They're not just sneaking in and trying to, hear illegally. What they're just trying to do is cheat their way to the front of the line. And the best way to do that is, refugee. So everybody makes refugee claims. Nobody actually, claims to be an immigrant. But he didn't know this. So he goes one night to, and he was so excited and he was so happy. He said, "Oh, finally," he says, "I got my." He says, because right now he was working at a temporary visa, and he couldn't work for the government. He couldn't work for anything good. He was, mopping floors beside me. Not that was such a horrible thing to be working beside me, but he wasn't eligible to go to school. He wasn't eligible. There was a whole bunch of things he wasn't eligible to do because he didn't have the visa for it. But if he would become a citizen, he could, do like everybody else, apply for all these jobs. Because there's a lot of jobs in the government you can't have unless you're a citizen, right? And that's kind of what he wanted to do, was work in something like that. So anyway, he comes back the next day to work, and you could see it right in his face. He wasn't happy. So I'm like, how did it go? Dare I ask, kind of thing. And he goes, well, he says some new refugees came in, and he says, I got to wait another 8 months to see the immigration officer again. I'm like, and you can just tell, it just took it out of him, And it wasn't long after that, he found another job and he left. I never saw him again for about another 2 or 3 years. And I ran into him one day. I didn't recognize him because he was all spiffed up in a suit, and he had longer hair, and it was all, all fancy and everything like that. And he's like, Reg! And speaking almost perfect English, he'd progressed that much. He went to school. he had gotten a really good job in Bell Canada building where I was still mopping floors. So I moved up. I went from mopping floors into a really low level building to a really nice level building. And you know what? When you mop floors in a low level building, like a crappy building or a nice building, it's still the same amount of work. So anyway, so I'm in there and I'm talking to him like, Marino, how you doing? He goes, good. He says, yeah. He says, I finally got my citizenship. He says, I was able to go to school. Now I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And I'm like so happy for him. You know what I mean? Because here's a guy that you want in your country. But one of the things is, because and the stuff that we take for granted here too is that I wasn't so happy for him that he got a job that he wanted. I was happy for him because I knew where he had came from. And this is something that Marco Rubio, who I don't necessarily agree with all the time, because I think his idea is, no, keep sanctions on Cuba, but bring all the Cubans here, so they don't have to live in Cuba. That's not going to work either, because it's, mass immigration just creates cultural clashes and just basically cultural displacements. That's all it does. So you have to integrate people. Marino would be an example of a person that integrated extremely well. I don't know how he's doing to this day, but at that time, he's an improvement into the country. You know what I mean? So, but he was telling me things like, I said in Cuba, because it's still communist there. He goes, well, yeah. He says it kind of is. He says it's communist, but it's not. He says basically we survive on tourism. But yet the people can't have anything. He says, for example, if you're driving down the road. He says, like, if you're like a teacher or like a road worker or something like that, he says you can't have a car. But if you're a doctor or a lawyer, something like that, you're allowed to have a car. But if you're driving down the road, unless you're really, really high up there, and you see people on the sidewalk going in a direction, you have to stop and pick those people up until your vehicle's at capacity and take them. You don't have to divert your course, but you have to take them to the next place. So let's say one guy basically become like a city bus, right? And the thing is that this is, it's illegal not to do this. Plus, of course, there's the government spying on you. They don't have like the NSA type of spying, but they can accuse you of things. You just disappear in the night. In Cuba, I don't know if it's still the same, but it's not mandatory to work there. Okay, and food is supplied by the government. The problem is if they have one potato, it's one potato for XYZ amount of people. So if you're going to live on government handouts in Cuba, well, that's why they're so poor there. That's what extreme socialism will get you, because it's not really socialism, it's just enslavement. So the counter-argument that Marco Rubio was making, which I agree with, is that, not 100% agree with, but that if you give money to Cuba, okay, it's not going to go to the people. It's going to go to, Raul Castro, and, to keep preserving Fidel Castro for the next 400 years. I mean, that man's never going to die. He's never going to die. And the thing is that when the money goes there, it's just going to help the communist regime. Now, these people, when they die off, who's going to replace them? Well, that's where I think you're going to get your, your revolutionaries coming out, because it's not, again, this is kind of the same thing I said about Saddam and stuff like that. Now, Cuba has a fairly low crime rate. It's not out of whack like the rest of South America. Well, I wouldn't consider South America, but it's not as, because people are too afraid to break the law there. Although they do, you've got all kinds of cartels and stuff like that. But that's not the average person, right? I mean, like if you look at like Mexico or Guatemala or someplace like that, I mean, the cartel, or Honduras, again, it's just communist dictators and cartels. That's all that's ruling there. Well, Cuba's not that much different. It's just, the thing is, in Cuba, you don't want to go to jail there. I mean, it's a nasty, nasty place to go to jail. But people fear the government there. They do. And it's so easy to get locked up for, they're in fear of the government. And that kind of control that the government has, again, yeah, it's an archaic idea, 1950s kind of Soviet, kind of Stalinism. Castro and Stalin, very, very similar in their ways. Stalin being more the deeper end of the pool, but same idea, So that's why you see, like these old vehicles 1950s vehicles, still Studebakers and stuff like that, driving around Cuba. Because they're still there. Now that said, Cuba, like any communist regime, can't support itself on free stuff because no one's paying for it. They don't really have a tax base that's going to, I'm not an expert on Cuba, but you can just make the calculation yourself. So they know they have to bring in revenue somewhere. Well, Cuba has one of the best medical systems in the world, but it's not really for the people. It's for people. Again, they make money off of tourists and stuff like that. Now the thing is the only reason why this regime is as far as it is well, number one, the people have become complacent to it. Number two, there's no better alternatives. Number three, it's supported by free market capitalism. Yeah, basically, you want to get your eyes checked. You go pay. I know people that I've talked to, family members that have had people, their family members, go to Cuba for operations and stuff like that. They said it's like the best doctors, the best this, that, and everything. So it's not that they're not capable. It's definitely not they're not capable. But the thing is, it's not for everybody. The money that they take in goes to the government type of thing, and it doesn't help the people. And anytime you see these governments saying, "Oh yeah, but they do this for the people, they do that for them," they really don't do much. I mean, people in Cuba are poor. They're poor for a reason, and they can't get out of that. Now, Cuba doesn't really have a lot of resources. It's not a very big island or country. It's an island, right? Island nation. So they're going to be limited in anything they do. They can't import much because it costs too much, and their currency's not worth very much. And so what do they have? Well, they have people. So if they have people, they have labor. The United States does exploit some of the labor in Cuba, the same way they do in China and stuff like that, just to a lesser degree, but they do. Farming fields and stuff like that. So again, all the business you give to Cuba goes to support the regime. So now, why would they, lift sanctions? And again, you have Obama saying sanctions don't work. They haven't worked in the last 50 years. And if you're in that camp, then you need to consider this. Why would they if sanctions don't work, why are they putting sanctions on Russia? Okay, if they don't work. Does that make sense to you? Why do they have sanctions still against North Korea then? Are they going to lift all the North Korean sanctions? I don't think so. Why? Because North Korea is not of interest right now. Assad, you've recently put sanctions on the Netherlands and Switzerland. Not very many sanctions, but you get the idea. So here's Obama talking outside of his face saying, "No, we're doing this because of human rights, for limiting children, for democracy." And Trudeau's idea was basically, yeah, it's not perfect, but at least it'll give the people something, and it'll be slow and gradual, and eventually someday their government will see the light, and the people will have democracy. Okay, ask yourself this: if our governments don't want us to have democracy by spying on us, by take away as many rights and freedoms as they could possibly do, arrest without warrant, this is what happens in our country, including Canada, United States, Canada. Yeah, that happens here. And they think the people that already have control of that over there, the communist regime, is going to give that up when they already have that? They have it almost perfected? Of course not. They're never going to give that up. So what's it really about then? Well, it's about resources. It's always about resources. And unfortunately, this dose of democracy, it might not come out right away. It might not happen right away, but it will destroy Cuba. Why? Because the simple philosophy, if I can't have it, nobody can. The same thing that's happening into Ukraine, Syria, all those places, Iraq, Afghanistan. If I can't have it, nobody can. So what am I talking about? Well, you need to understand that this is coming out at a time when, I guess it was last month or whatever, from the making of this video, from this, greatness that Obama's trying to spread. And of course the mainstream media is going along with the propaganda, but what they're not telling you is Russia just paid off 90% of Cuba's debt. Now, did the Russians do that out of the goodness of their hearts? Probably not. What the Russians probably did that for is A, so they could establish a naval base and military bases, which puts us back into, like the Cuban Missile Crisis type of thing, where you're going to have Russia be building up on the U.S. border. You say, no, that won't happen. Well, right now, the U.S. is building up on Russia's border, so yeah, what's good for the goose is going to be good for the gander. The next thing is gas exploration. With the sanctions, okay, this goes back to globalism. Again, every one of these politicians is a globalist, so it means globalists love to steal people's resources. What will end up happening is, because the Americans can't explore for gas in the region, which they'll be doing it for themselves, not for the benefit of the Cuban people. I mean, a few people will benefit, like they'll give the people the jobs or whatever, but the money isn't going to go to the people. It's not going to go for social programs. It's not going to go for, all this stuff. Again, most of the Cuban people, they're repressed. Maybe I don't have everything right. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of Cubans that'll say, no, well, you don't know this and you don't know that, and that's fine. But what just a little we do know. We know the people in Cuba aren't living in mansions. It's only a select few that get. There's a big wealth gap, we'll just say, between the rich and the poor there. So again, when big oil or big gas goes there, those resources are, if they benefit anything in Cuba, it's going to be the military-industrial complex of Cuba, at best. However, the United States is never going to let that happen. So that money is going to go somewhere else. It's not going to benefit Cuba hardly at all. So what they'll do is pay off a bunch of the, the politicians or whatever, and Cuba goes on the way it is. But because they will be stealing these resources, not so much from the Cubans, okay, because you're not looking at it the way these Russia and the United States and all these other globalists look. They don't look at your resources as your resources. They look at it as their resources. Meaning, if Russia just paid 90% of Cuba's debt, it's expecting something for that debt. If it goes pro-America, they've just lost a huge investment. And you think the Russians are just going to let the Cubans walk away from that? No, there will be revolutionaries. There will be, there will be all kinds of terrorism. There'll be, all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's already a jihadist problem in Cuba to begin with. Maybe not a big one, but it's there. It's there. The cartels will be, 10 times worse than what they are now. So it will destroy Cuba's economy, even worse than what it is. There's not much to destroy there. It's already broke, right? So this is the rock and hard place for Cuba. I don't envy them at all. This is the beginning of it. It may take a few years to go, depending on what else goes on in the world. Provided we haven't blown ourselves up, within 10 years, Cuba will be smoldering rubble from within. Again, if I can't have it, no one can. You'll get... basically your typical environmental movements against the drilling, if the Americans do it and the Russians can't, and counter, and counter. So basically, it becomes monkey in the middle kind of thing for Cuba. The caught between two superpowers that are fighting. It's always about Russia, China, and the United States at the end of the day. When we're talking anything the U.S. does, the U.S. foreign policy is written in blood. So if the Cubans think they're going to benefit, there'll be some small benefits at first. But no, again, if you, let's say, paid for, somebody, a business to start up, okay? Say you paid 90% of their startup cost. And you say, okay, well, there, but in return, I'm going to want this, this, and this. But then they go to somebody else and give them the benefit. You're going to be pretty mad, right? Now, imagine you're the Russian government. You're going to get even for that. You have to understand, too, this also plays into the World War III. You have to understand, electronic warfare, Russian electronic warfare ships have already been into Cuba a few times each year. Now, thing is the United States has already been trying to destabilize Venezuela even more because of its ties with Russia. Anywhere there's a tie between Russia or China, the United States is trying to destabilize. Period. End of discussion. That's what they're doing. There's no good guys here. But there's going to be a lot of innocent people killed in between. So I think when we're looking at it like that, that's my take on it. On the mainstream media you'll hear about the women and children and democracy and all this and human rights. But at the end of the day, the Cubans will just lose very, very little that they don't even own. That's humanity. That's how horrible this is going to get. And Obama is, if you look at anywhere he's intervened, anywhere. I know a lot of people still want to blame George Bush for Obama's shortcomings, but you're missing the point. George Bush and Obama are the same type of person. They're controlled by the same bankers and big corporations. They're the exact same. They're two sides of the same coin. The policies are identical. And the policy is basically, if you look at what they're doing in Afghanistan, they're stealing the opium, they're stealing the oil, they're stealing all kinds of stuff. You look at why they're back in Iraq. It's not because of ISIS. It's because there's palladium, platinum, gold, fuel. Remember, the petrodollar. You have to understand the petrodollar. If Cuba was to allow Russia to, help develop its oil, okay, Cuba could sell that oil in any price, in any currency denomination they want. And that in itself tells you everything you need to know. So if the United States, can basically, can't, they can't have anybody sell oil outside the U.S. dollar. Because, again, Saddam, he died not because he was a horrible dictator. Again, the same government that gave Saddam chemical weapons to use on the Iranians, okay, is basically the guy who said, we're going to sell our oil outside the U.S. dollar. We're talking about selling it in the euro, meaning that the United States would no longer have Iraqi oil, okay, sold in U.S. dollars. That weakens the U.S. dollar, or allows people to go around the U.S. dollar. And that's the war that's really going on right now, is the war of currencies, okay? And the thing is the U.S. dollar's days, it'll be used for the next probably 50 years if we haven't gotten into a big war. But you have to understand, this could be the very thing that leads to the war, is the collapsing of the U.S. dollar, which at the estimate, nobody knows how much debt the U.S. actually has. If you had just what they have on the books, it's $18 trillion. That much money doesn't exist on the planet. In unfunded liabilities and all other things, about $200 trillion. Impossible to pay back even $18 trillion, let alone 200. Other things, derivatives and other things like that, quadrillions of dollars, like $3 or $4 quadrillion. It's an unfathomable amount of money. You could make a staircase to take yourself halfway to the moon and back on that much money. In $1,000 bills. It's just incredible. Nobody can fathom that amount of money. It doesn't exist. All economies combined. So the U.S. Banking system is completely corrupt and everything like that. So the only thing you can do is two things. Number one, control the pricing of commodities in your currency, so people have to use your currency. The next thing is control the actual resource. So if you control the pricing of the resources, that's number one. If you control the resource itself, that's number two. And once you do that, you can control the world. Ye who has the gold rule. Ye who has gold rules. Now with Cuba, again, this kind of flash out of nowhere. Obama's working on his legacy and trying to help the Cuban people. The only thing they're going to do, okay, if the Russians don't counter, this is all that will happen. Cuba becomes the new China. Basically, all the manufacturing, and you have to understand the so-called recovery that they're talking about in the States that doesn't exist. Okay, they add foreign manufacturing as jobs in the United States. That's why when jobs go down to Mexico, it looks, oh yeah, well, we created 300,000 jobs for the U.S. economy. Yeah, but they don't tell you where, in what country. They don't tell you that, and that's why, because it's a sham. But again, here's another group that's going to get played off the bigger group. So you have the illegal Mexicans coming in, and whoever else is coming in through the U.S. border that's wide open and unprotected, okay? And those people are to lower, that's called insourcing. They're lowering, they do it here in Canada, they just do it a little bit more legitly, and not to the greater number. But basically you bring in people from the third world, and you basically give them your jobs with no benefits, at half the wages, that type of thing, and you undercut the labor. And the argument becomes, that political correct argument, well, it helps these people so they can get out of their, the poverty-stricken countries and so on. No, all it does is when they come here and you undercut the labor, is you make everybody equally poor in the long run. Why? Because then what ends up happening is nobody can afford to shop where they work. This is what's happening with McDonald's. This is what's happening with a lot of these retail stores. People don't make enough money to shop there. So even everyday low, if you raise your dollar to the bottom, you'll get there. And everyday low prices leads to a lot of poor people because you can't afford to pay people what they're actually worth. And the corporations that can afford to pay, they outsource the labor. Again, if you look at the 1990s, why we had that recession in the 1990s has a lot to do with NAFTA. You know what I mean? It really does. And NAFTA basically gave all our jobs to China. and India and places like that. I have nothing. I mean, if there's enough to go around, I don't mind. The thing is when you have, when you're sending your labor over to a place where you can pay people pennies on the dollar, well, of course, that's going to undercut the labor here. And when you put the people out of labor here, well, what happens? You end up with a third world. You end up with such a wealth gap that, and this is what people are kind of catching on. Globalism is a massive failure. So what comes after globalism? Well, because globalism, all these cheap products that, basically nobody can afford to buy. I mean, when you can't afford to buy stuff from China anymore, there's a problem. There's a major problem. So, again, insourcing and outsourcing. So manufacturing offshore is what Cuba will become. But again, because of the destabilization, that this is not something that, you have to factor in that they're doing this, almost a guarantee that they're doing this because of the connection. They don't want Russia moving into Cuba. Too late, And I don't think the Cubans are going to play well. I think they're going to, extort the U.S. taxpayer. And I'm talking to the Cuban government. Cuban people have no idea that this is probably going on. Like anything. I mean, they're not going to benefit. They're just simply not going to benefit. So, Obama will probably say, yeah, okay, well, there'll be open door immigration to Cuba too. Again, bring in cheap labor. So all this does is destroy. If you haven't figured out by now, the globalists are trying to destroy the United States. Period. Because they want it for them, not for everybody else. They don't care about the little people because they're up here, right, in their ivory towers. So basically, they don't care about mass immigration. They don't care about borders or anything like that because they don't have, they don't have to pay for any of it after all. In the end, it's all going to collapse. But like what Russia did in the 1990s, all the money goes to the military-industrial complex. It's just a different form of hegemony or monarchy or whatever. Again, could kings rule if they didn't have an army to protect them? No. That's what you're seeing. So when you're seeing the United States and Canada, well, pretty much everywhere in the world, turning more and more like China, when their policies on privacy and stuff are becoming more and more like China every day, this tells you what they're going to do. But a country that doesn't already have that, they're never going to get that. They're never going to have the liberty. They're never going to have that freedom. And by giving money to, the Communist Party, by, like again, all the jobs that are going to go there, any money that goes back to the people is going to be state-run. Yeah, they'll pay a few people, but the money, the profits are going to go to the state. In other words, it's going, the people are never going to benefit from it. That type of thing. So, if you look at how Cuba does business now, again, they make money on tourism. And they make money on a few other things, but primarily tourism. I mean, if you're a Cuban resident, okay, and you harass somebody, and this is why a lot of tourists go to Cuba, because you go to other places, you've got all these locals that are always going on the beaches and asking for money and trying to sell you stuff and stuff like that. Now they do that in Cuba too, but they do a lot more in South America. But in Cuba, okay, the way they're doing it is that if they catch you harassing the tourists, they'll kill you. I mean, they'll definitely lock you up at best, but they will kill you. Why? Because if you scare away the tourism, that's their bread and butter, right? And the other thing is for example, if they catch people fraternizing with the tourists and stuff like that, could land you in jail. That type of thing, and they do spy on their people. The other thing too is that they won't allow the people to ever really benefit. Yeah, they've made some strides forward, sure, but at the end of the day, the people there cannot. It's not that the country's not capable of prospering; it's they're not allowed to. It's the same everywhere, So when you see this, Obama just kind of coming out of nowhere, and all of a sudden he cares so much about Cuba. You could say, well, he's doing it just to get the Cuban vote. He's already got the Cuban vote. If you haven't picked up, and again, you can call me racist, bigot if you want, whatever. What the heck happened here? That's all right. But, pretty much anybody that's non-white is going to vote for Obama no matter what. So he's got that. Now he's just working on what he calls his legacy. But the problem is that, again, it's not about the people. The Democratic Party is pretty much toast right now. You're going to get a Republican in the next election, most likely. It would be Jeb Bush or, Chris Christie or even Marco Rubio. Who knows who's going to be. But Even what you call Romney might run again. But you have to understand, these guys are two sides of the same coin. They're going to do the same thing when they get in. So the first thing you need to do in the States is get out of the foreign policy. Go back to your Constitution. That'll save you and your children. And yes, tyranny will reign in the world, no matter what you do. But all this foreign policy hasn't made anybody any safer. No, it hasn't. And do you really think that they're going to help the Cubans? Do you really think they're going to help them? No, they're not going to. Obama's been basically telling everybody, if you get here, we'll give you amnesty, which has led to a lot of Cubans dying trying to get to the United States in makeshift rafts. If you've seen, that tells you the desperation of the people. Find fault with that. When you see like 100 people in a boat that only carries 50, and how many of them go down? You have bodies washing up on the shore all the time, and when you promise, freedom, which these people don't realize that, they may get away from Cuba and stuff like that, and it's probably going to be a step up for them, but they're never going to really prosper when they get here either. Now, even if they get asylum, it's going to be taking them 10 to 15 years to become a citizen. So, again, in that time, your labor is exploited. You've undercut the labor of the citizenry. And again, they always talk about the immigrants and the illegals, and we have to make everything so good for them, but they never talk about the people that are already here. Same here in Canada. We're bringing in 250,000 people a year, bumping it up to 285 million people. The Conservative government has brought in more people than the Liberals ever did, by almost 3 times. Now, to me, that's way too many people, way too fast, and yes, it is done to undercut labor. Now, when they got caught at this, they've kind of changed it a bit, but I think our economy is a little bit more straight in line, because they do understand if you just make everybody poor, you won't have a tax base. You just won't have a tax base. This is what destroys the natives, and they haven't figured it out yet. Stop asking for free stuff. The free stuff is never going to be, number one, you'll never get enough of it. Number two, again, welfare programs make dependency. They don't make free thinkers. You'll never get out of that grind. You have to do things for yourself, number one. Number two, if you race your dollar to the bottom, it will get there. Everyday low prices means everyday low wages. And if you're trying to even undercut that, well, I think it's very clear what Obama's really up to. The man is an evil, evil man. Like any one of these, again, you have the declaration of war pretty much declared against Russia through House Resolution 758, and I did a video on it the other day. You should go check that one out, because it explains an awful lot of, the language isn't always plain easy, we're going to war with Russia. No, it's all subliminal. It's all lawyer speak. It's all how they word it. But when you understand that the meanings of the words that they're saying, they're basically telling you we're at war with Russia. And one of the things that's going to happen is economic sabotage. And again, if the relations between Cuba and Russia were getting warmer, well, the best thing that the United States could do is, offer something better. Because the Cuban people are going to go towards the United States before Russia. But they don't realize that they're not really going to be helped out in the long run as a people as a whole. So 20 years down the road, if we haven't blown ourselves up, again, Cuba will be so devastated because it will be devastated by one side or the other. So either the Russians will destabilize it, or the Americans will destabilize it if the Cubans don't play along. But no matter what, people will suffer the most. Again, democracy went to Ukraine. How's that looking right now? Democracy went to Syria. How's that looking right now? You know what I mean? And you say, yeah, but those are different. They're different. No, the Ukraine wasn't that much different than Cuba. And again, the whole thing about the Ukraine is really a war against Russia. Now, I'm not pro-Russia or because, there's no good guys there either. But what I'm saying is that the people, they can live with corruption, but they can't live with being shot at. They can't live with revolution. You can't live with destabilization like that. These people don't deserve that. The Ukrainians don't deserve that. But this is what the Western governments do. It's what central bankers do. And trust me, central bankers, when they invest in something, again, look at Saudi Arabia. That's probably how Cuba will end up. So we have enough people to work in our factories that undercuts the labor in the United States, Canada, and anywhere else, and everybody else can just go to hell and starve to death. Again, they're already doing that now, so if you think it's going to improve. Again, just to put things in perspective before I wrap this up, you have a government that spies on its people, and when it gets caught spying on its people, it just changes the laws so that it's legal. And then demands to be able to spy on more, do more spying. And what's it going to do with all this information? So how is the United States different than Cuba? It's already doing the same human rights violations of spying. Just because they make it legal doesn't mean it's just. This is also from again, how many millions of dollars are they throwing away like drunken sailors to all these foreign aid programs? And I'm not talking, feeding the starving Marvins. Most people can accept that. Okay, well, there's natural disaster here. We sent the military. Okay, most people are like, okay, well, at least you're helping people. But, we're going to send military aid here. We're going to send military aid there, which is lethal aid, which helps war keep going. So, the ISIS, the fact that the Free Syrian Army turned into Al-Nusra Front and Al-Qaeda, and then basically turned into ISIS. The fact that Muammar Gaddafi was going to, again, a dictator like Raul Castro or Fidel Castro. Again, you have a dictator, okay, that was stability in the region. Nice guy? No. Gaddafi wasn't a nice guy. He was a horrible guy. He was horrible. Same with Saddam. They were horrible, horrible people. Nobody can test that. But how's Libya doing right now when they got their dose of democracy? The country's on fire. It's completely destroyed. Egypt, they did a dose of democracy there. How many revolutions have they had since? You know what I mean? So, and the very guy that they overthrew got off scot-free and is getting back in. So, can you find me one Obama policy that actually worked? Even, again, the idea with the Obamacare. If you have your doctor, you can keep it. No, you can't. The Obamacare website apparently got taken down because they can't get that. They can't even get that to work. So everything that man touches, he destroys. Is it because he's incompetent? No, it's not because he's incompetent. He knows what he's doing. That's his job. His job is to be a divisionist. Oh, we're going to get justice for Michael Brown. They knew right away. Okay, they knew right away, just from looking at it, that it was a self-defense shoot. Now you might be one of those people who say, yeah, well, the cop did this and the cop. 8 people testified on behalf of the cop. Okay? The forensic scientist said, no, this kid basically was facing the cop. So the evidence is overwhelming, within reasonable doubt, well beyond reasonable doubt, that this cop defended himself. The Eric Holder, Obama, they both knew right away that don't let this, they know that if we endorse this, it will inflame people. They know this. They know that the guy's going to get off. They knew it. They knew it right from the get-go. Okay? And when you look at that, that means they're purposely riled people up to get destabilization in the country. Maybe they're doing it as distraction. What I think is they're doing it, and if you think Cuba's bad, just wait till this plays out. And you saw a thing on the Alex Jones show the other night about the Bearcat or MRAPs, police officer talking about gun owners and constitutionalists and stuff like that. So the sheriff came out and he called Alex Jones out, which I applaud that he did that. And the sheriff did make a lot of good points. He says, look, you showed a 3-second clip to demonize us. So Alex Jones, well, he countered pretty well. What did he do? He showed the whole clip. And it still demonizes the officer. Now, the officers do say a bunch of things in there that are true. The world is crazy right now. And, I do agree with a lot of the points that the officers are making. But I don't think these things should be just willy-nilly on the street. They call a SWAT team for a kitten in a tree. You know what I mean? Like, it's ridiculous, the militarization of the police. So you have the militarization of the police, the Department of Homeland Security, and the NSA, which are all put there to stomp down the people. And you really think that this government that they have is going to actually give democracy to Cuba? When they're trying to completely disarm the people in the United States, when 52% out of 80-some-odd thousand people polled were in favor, and this was a backfire on them too. They polled people to say, because they wanted people to say, oh, we should get rid of guns and more gun control. But the problem is it became such a hot-button topic that people started looking into it. This is the problem they're having with the internet. You've got Feinstein, you've got Kerry. Oh, the internet makes it hard to govern. No, it makes it hard to lie. So you have these governments, even Hillary Clinton, we're losing the info war. And what she's talking about is basically they can't brainwash people. You have Eric Holder talking about brainwashing people. These people have the most insensitively cruel agendas. They are Marxist by nature. They are controlled by the most psychopathic banking system. Again, dumb criminals sell drugs, smart criminals get into central banking. And with all that's going on, with all the corruption in the U.S. government that's going on, with all the destabilization, with all the countries that Obama has created war with, and yeah, you can slag George Bush, and Jeb Bush will be just as bad, if he gets in. So with all that going on, do you really think they're going to help Cuba? And if you're Cuban, do you really trust the United States? I mean, do you really trust them? I can imagine, if you can make it there, and you can, again, I have nothing against any people from anywhere. Like I say, that story from my friend Marino, I was very, very happy for him when he integrated so well into the system. That's the type of immigration system you need, not open-door immigration. It doesn't work. Because you don't save people, you actually make things dangerous by raising the crime rates and stuff like that. So I guess I'm going to leave it at that. So that's my take on what's going on in Cuba. We'll have to wait and see it happen. This is not going to stop. You're going to see probably overnight. This is always a long con, but it is because of other things factored. They don't mention, it's funny how the mainstream media never mentions things like, hey, Russia just paid off so much of 90% of Cuba's debt. They're doing this to all the countries in that area, like Venezuela, Argentina. Again, the Russians are going to have all kinds. They only have 10 military bases now. Okay, now here's one last thing to consider. All the Soviet bases that were closed, that are now being reopened. We have over 18 Soviet Arctic bases that have been reopened, and then 7 bases before that in the last month. Stuff that's been closed since the 1960s, 1970s. Okay? So this is where, U.S.-Russian relations, that has a lot to do with the stability in the world, are at the lowest they've ever been, under the Peace Prize winning war-mongering president. Okay, you have that going on. And again, do you trust that with all that going on, number one, the Russians are going to start, they only have 10 bases abroad right now. The Americans have a little over 600. They've closed down a few. Okay, so do you not think that because of all this destabilization that the Obama regime has put out, and God knows what the next regime is going to be like, it's getting worse. George Bush was bad, Obama's worse, the next guy, complete, utter tyrant. Okay, and do you not think that the Russians are going to respond in kind by basically putting nuclear weapons in South America? Look, you probably say that'll never happen. Okay, this time last year, the Ukraine was a peaceful place. It was corrupt. It was a peaceful place. There were no nuclear Topol-M mobile missile launchers in the Crimea. Crimea was still a part of the Ukraine. So, if you look at who really started the coup, it was a U.S. coup that the Russians counter-couped, that now 4,000 people died because of the East-West fighting that's going on. And remember the sayings of Adam Albright. Yes, we do believe the price is worth it. It's always funny when it's, not their kids and family and stuff dying. So again, I feel bad what's about to happen to the Cuban people. The track record of the government pretty much speaks for itself. They'll blame it on Russia and stuff like that when the destabilization happens, because that's the goal, is to blame the economic collapse on Russia. Because you have to understand, what's also coming to the United States, they have to get a war going. They have to, because you have Jamie Dimon, J.P. Morgan central banker for the Rothschilds, basically calling up Congress members saying, hey, put this in the bill, and making U.S. taxpayers on the hook for $2 to $4 trillion of derivatives. I don't fully understand derivatives. All you need to know is that's your retirement, your health care, paved roads, school, whatever. That's where all that's going. That's your tax dollars that are going to central bankers. And that's not good. So this is the government that you think is going to actually help Cuba? No, they're not going to help Cuba. In fact, Cuba has just got a death nail put into it. It will be destabilized. How they'll destabilize it? Yeah. They'll think of stuff that we can't even think of. But the people, unfortunately, I feel bad for them. I don't envy them. So I guess I'll leave it at about that. This comes out of nowhere, but trust me, it's well planned. Oh boy. And the worst is when you have nuclear missiles in Ukraine, and, like I say, I just covered a video where the Russians are also sending their state-of-the-art submarines there now too, nuclear capable. Add on to that, just imagine the Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0 when 50 Topol-Ams end up in Topol. If you don't know what Topol-Am is, it's a thing that nightmares are scared of. When 50 of those end up in Cuba or in Venezuela, maybe the American public, you're not going to get it on the mainstream media, and this is the thing is, this is why you got to kind of take it on yourself to kind of educate people. Don't try to brainwash them. Don't even get upset when they don't believe you. But as long as they heard it come from your mouth, when they see it, it'll click with them. Say, I remember he talked about this. Tell me more. So don't try to convince people. Just let them know what's going on. Be calm, casual. Direct them to my videos if you want. I'm not just giving myself a plug, or videos like it. Make videos yourself. Whatever. You can do that. Post them to your Facebook and stuff like that. At least help wake up your family. Because even if they don't believe you, they're aware of it. They're aware of it. And when they're aware of it, that's what's going to infect change in the long run. Because a lot of people, again, they will subvert to things very cautiously. Because it goes outside that comfort zone, the normal bias. But if they can make a choice in the future that helps to curb this passively, that's even the best thing. In other words, maybe they vote for a better candidate that's why the only chance the Americans have right now, love him or hate him, is Rand Paul. That's the only choice they have. Ted Cruz will get you into a war like that because he's too pro-Israel. Rand Paul is pretty pro-Israel, but at least he's against foreign intervention for the most part. But they'll probably assassinate him before they ever let him win. So, but you got to try, right? Ron Paul, I think, is just too old. I'd vote for Rand Paul before Ron Paul because I think Rand Paul's a little more moderate. But we'll have to see, and what'll tell you whether to vote for Rand Paul in 2016 if you're an American. I'm a Canadian, so I'm not in that fight. But the world does swing on this pendulum, right? Is see how they do, see how the Tea Party does. And how they vote in the, in January when they have power. See what they defund. If they start defunding Obamacare, if they start defunding, foreign interventions, that might be. Then that tells you vote for those people because they actually care for the country and they don't want us to die a horrible death. Now I know, horrible death meaning thermonuclear war. Now Cuba, again, the Americans aren't going to give them what they want, so the Russians will destabilize with revolution, and if the Russians get in there, they'll destabilize the Russians with revolution. The thing is the Cubans are more aligned with the Russians than, government-wise than they are with the Americans. They'll quash any uprising there right away. And again, watch what George Soros does, because he'll be in on this Cuban thing as well. Again, that slime bag of the earth. And he does it for the Rothschilds, so... All right, so I guess I'll leave it at that. So if you're from Cuba and you want to, fill people in on maybe things I've gotten wrong, because again, not everybody's going to agree with me. I get that, but fill us in. Let us know. How you guys doing over there? Do you trust? Here's the question: if you're a Cuban, do you, even if you're not a Cuban, do you trust that Obama's being genuine on this? That it's for the women and children and for democracy, or do you not see it as they're going to just go and steal your resources? Tell me what you think. So. If you like this kind of content, there will be a link down below for people to make a donation, and thank you very much to everybody who has. I haven't quite figured out how to respond to people that do make donations, because I'm good at the geopolitical stuff and other things, but I'm kind of a bit of a tech tard, so I don't know how to respond to people. As soon as I do, I will respond. But if you'd like to be mentioned or something like that, let me know, and I'll gladly mention you. It will help the channel. It's not going to happen overnight, but hopefully in the near future, you'll see some upgrades. I don't want to make any claims right now because I have to wait to see what I can do. I like to just show you, and then that way you see what you're getting for your money, type of thing. My first thing is baby steps. I would like to do live chats with people and stuff like that. It's nice to hear one-on-one. Don't get me wrong, I love hearing myself speak, but sometimes it's nice to have other people to talk to too. So that's some of the things that will come in the future. Rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. You can also check out my WW3 updates Facebook page if you want to just see the geopolitical there. Again, not for fart jokes. It's mainly for, you can post stuff there, that anything that's relevant to the geopolitical, leading us to like war and stuff like that with Russia or China or whoever. I will be doing a thing on one of those picture videos that I normally do on the Chinese military. It should be out hopefully tomorrow from the making of this video. You might want to see that one. I'm sure that one's going to get a lot of bantering back and forth of the numbers and stuff like that. But I think just to show people what's going on there. Next to that, be true to yourself, be true to others. Always do the right thing, and have a great day. G'day, hi, and welcome. Okay, Cuba. We're going to talk about Cuba. All right. So, with the new things going on in Cuba, of course, the mainstream media is praising it as, this is a great thing for Cuba, this is a great thing for Cuba. I don't think this is going to be as good for Cuba as people think it is. For those who don't know, Canada's role in Cuba kind of goes like this. Back to Pierre Elliott Trudeau, he kind of went around the Americans' idea of, instead of isolating Cuba with sanctions, what we'll do is we'll do limited trade with them, and if they improve their human rights and move towards democracy, we'll do more. So, of course, I think something like 800,000 Canadians go to Cuba every year for vacation, that type of thing. And we've been doing it for, I guess, 40 years now, 30, 40 years, whatever it is. I guess about 40 years now. So when that's happening, has Cuba, we've had, the Americans have had sanctions on Cuba forever. So basically, the Cuban economy is basically based on tourism, pretty much. It's the only economy they really have. Now, I've worked with Cuban people before, and, when you ask them about Cuba, it's not a place you'd want to live. And anybody that vacations there will usually probably tell you, when you go to Cuba, bring your own toothpaste, bring your own things, because they don't have that there. It's pretty Spartan, The Cubans aren't really allowed to have anything. And when I worked with a guy named Marino, he'd moved to Canada, and this is kind of what changed I had a bit, because I was a younger man, I was in my early 20s, I had a bit more of a leftist view on immigration at the time, saying, if you just give everybody a chance, everybody will do good, and, the more people you can bring in, probably the better, because we have such a great country here, and you don't think abstract, you don't think, there's a lot of things you don't, when you're young, you're stupid, okay? When you're young, you're stupid. Just leave it at that. And I used to think, okay, well, the refugee thing was good, a good idea, and all that. And it's not that it's a horrible idea, but it's not a prosperous idea. So if you're wondering what I'm doing right now, just to divert, I got 38 specials that I have to reshape the case and pop the primers out of. So I'm going to be doing that as I'm doing this. So anyway, I started talking with Marino, and I was like, oh yeah, so you're from Cuba, you barely spoke a word of English, well enough that you could understand him and stuff like that, but yeah, he struggled with a few words and stuff like that. And him and his wife had moved here to Canada, and they were trying to make a go of it, and he had moved here a couple years earlier, okay? And here's what ended up happening. Every time he went to go to get a hearing for his immigration status, a refugee would come in, make a claim, and he'd get backed up to the back of the line. So, and he says it takes like 2 years to get seen. The back, because we bring in so many people, and everybody figured out that if we just claim asylum, you go around the people that are coming through. Technically these people are still following the Immigration Act, so they're, at least they're doing it legally. They're not just sneaking in and trying to, hear illegally. What they're just trying to do is cheat their way to the front of the line. And the best way to do that is, refugee. So everybody makes refugee claims. Nobody actually, claims to be an immigrant. But he didn't know this. So he goes one night to, and he was so excited and he was so happy. He says, "Oh, finally," he says, "I got my." He says, because right now he was working at a temporary visa, and he couldn't work for the government. He couldn't work for anything good. He was, mopping floors beside me. Not that was such a horrible thing to be working beside me, but he wasn't eligible to go to school. He wasn't eligible. There was a whole bunch of things he wasn't eligible to do because he didn't have the visa for it. But if he would become a citizen, he could, do like everybody else, apply for all these jobs, because there's a lot of jobs in the government you can't have unless you're a citizen, right? And that's kind of what he wanted to do, was thinking something like that. So anyway, comes back the next day to work, and you could see it right in his face. He wasn't happy. So I'm like, how did it go? And, dare I ask, kind of thing. And he goes, well, he says some new refugees came in, and he says, I got to wait another 8 months to see the immigration officer again. I'm like, and you could just tell, it just took it out of him, And it wasn't long after that, he found another job and he left. And I never saw him again for about another 2 or 3 years. And I ran into him one day. I didn't recognize him because he was all spiffed up in a suit, and he had longer hair, and it was all all fancy and everything like that. And he's like, Reg! And speaking almost perfect English, he'd progressed that much. He went to school. He had gotten a really good job in Bell Canada building where I was still mopping floors. So I moved up. I went from mopping floors into a really low-level building to a really nice level building. And you know what? When you mop floors in a low-level building, like a crappy building or a nice building, it's still the same amount of work. So anyway, so I'm in there and I'm talking to him like, Marino, how you doing? He goes, good. He says, yeah. He says, I finally got my citizenship. He says, I was able to go to school. Now I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And I'm like so happy for him. You know what I mean? Because here's a guy that you want in your country. But one of the things is because and the stuff that we take for granted here too is that I wasn't so happy for him that he got a job that he wanted. I was happy for him because I knew where he came from. And this is something that Marco Rubio, who I don't necessarily agree with all the time, because I think his idea is, no, keep sanctions on Cuba, but bring all the Cubans here, so they don't have to live in Cuba. That's not going to work either, because it's, mass immigration just creates cultural clashes and just basically cultural displacements. That's all it does. So you have to integrate people. Marino would be an example of a person that integrated extremely well. I don't know how he's doing to this day, but at that time, he's an improvement into the country. You know what I mean? So, but he was telling me things like, I said in Cuba, because it's still communist there. He goes, well, yeah. He says it kind of. He says it's communist, but it's not. He says basically we survive on tourism. But yet the people can't have anything. He says, for example, if you're driving down the road. He says, like if you're like a teacher or like a road worker or something like that, he says you can't have a car. But if you're a doctor or a lawyer, something like that, you're allowed to have a car. But if you're driving down the road, unless you're really, really high up there, and you see people on the sidewalk going in a direction, you have to stop and pick those people up until your vehicle's at capacity and take them. You don't have to divert your course, but you have to take them to the next place. So let's say one guy basically become like a city bus, right? And the thing is that this is, it's illegal not to do this. Plus, of course, there's the government spying on you. They don't have like the NSA type of spying, but they could accuse you of this.